Hello, my name is Michael Ellis, and this is the first introductory video of a new series that we're offering called Spiral Dynamics. In this, we are going to take a look at a model for human development and cultural development that I think you'll find very, very helpful. I hope you had a chance to hear the introductory or the promotional video where I explain why this could be valuable to you. We're going to kind of start diving into it a little bit in this session. And again, spiral dynamics has application for individual development understanding and also cultural and societal development as well. Therefore, I found it to be immensely helpful in understanding life and particularly points of difficulty that we see in our own development and particularly in our culture and world. For instance, if you've been following the news of the time that I'm speaking, you know that there's really quite a battle between some very divergent worldviews that are going on, and particularly in American politics and American culture. But for instance, just to give you some examples, there's the sort of looting mentality that we see among some people. There's a law and order emphasis that we see among still other people. And then there are things where people will propose ideas like reducing or even eliminating police departments. Well, those are very, very different ideas about how we should be conducting things societally. And they actually represent different worldviews and different levels of consciousness development. So everybody holds these things very passionately. They're very convinced of their positions. But they're actually different levels that we will see. And we want to take you through all those and understand those. And I think the outcome can be for you, as we understand this, that we're less anxious about these various difficulties that we see. We see where they fit into the whole dynamic. And so we can understand that there's a flow going on here. And we may even get to the place of our own development where we're able to actually help that kind of flow along, that we can be a positive force for understanding between disparate groups and individuals. We also in this series will want to look at how this impacts Christian faith. I think it impacts virtually every part of life, but that will be certainly an interest that we have together of how that impacts our life, Christian life and our Christian practice. So what we're going to do after these introductory videos, we'll look at 7 levels of consciousness development. And so we'll go through each one of those levels one by one, a video for each one, and get to know what the characteristics, dynamics are, the traits of that particular level. And you get a good grasp. Lots of examples too that we'll be using that'll help hone it in for you, I believe. But after we've done this overview of all these 7 levels, we'll come back and look at the 7 levels again from the position of Christian faith and Christian faith development. And I think you'll find this most interesting again with lots of examples where you can begin to see, even within the Christian church, there are people with some very, very different views of what's going on here. And as we'll see, none of them really wrong. They're really just different levels of development. So again, we'll have great understanding. We'll also want to come back after we look at all 7 of those levels from the position of faith. We're going to then look at the Bible. And this is going to revolutionize how you see the Bible, I think, because what we'll see in the Bible is that there are people that are writing and interpreting God from these different levels as well. And we begin to see where those levels are, and we can begin to put those in the right place and glean the most that we can from the scriptures as they're presented to us. So let's get down in a little bit of background. We're not going to spend a whole ton of time here, but we want to definitely take a look at where this comes from. The formal name for spiral dynamics is the emergent cyclical double helix model of mature adult biosocial psychodevelopment. Yeah, well, we'll stick to spiral dynamics, okay? We'll make it simple. But that's the full name. It's very descriptive. This model was developed by a man named Claire W. Graves, who was a professor of psychology at Union College in Schenectady, New York, from 1948 to 1988. So he's 40 years in this post. And and he spent time in research of putting this model together. His research consisted of, with each new student that came into the school, he interviewed them. They didn't really know why. He was just asking questions about how they saw particular things. He was looking at what their values and worldviews were. And he would assess that and put all this and populate this in the way of data and statistics. But he'd also come back later on at different periods of time and interview these same people. And what he found was that over time, that these particular values and worldviews would shift a bit, that they would change over time. And not always, but frequently they would. And there was a directionality to the way these values and worldviews would change. And from this, we began to put together this particular model that we now call spiral dynamics. Now, later on, his work was picked up by two guys named Don Beck and one of his graduate students, Christopher Cohen, who, so Beck and Cohen, they actually put a book together called Spiral Dynamics, and it's really considered kind of the encyclopedia of spiral dynamics. So they developed the work a bit more and used it and played it out in particular ways. And in particular, Beck formed an organization where they would take spiral dynamics and begin to apply this upon invitation in countries in particular, or other organizations, but most high profile in countries that were having some sort of crisis or difficulty. And applying these understanding of these levels to work through these particular crises in particularly positive ways. Iceland is one place he did that. Has worked in the Middle East extensively, and South Africa was probably the shining light of his work. If you recall, when Nelson Mandela was elected as the president there of South Africa, he was taking over from F.W. de Klerk. And what they expected in this move from apartheid to non-apartheid and a democratic society, that there was going to be massive bloodshed. And Beck and his group were actually invited in to work with all these different groups. And South Africa has a wide range of these different levels of consciousness development. They work with these groups. And if you've ever seen the movie Invictus, it's really quite an interesting movie, but it's about the outcome of what Beck did in his work in South Africa. And that was to rally the whole country behind a sports group that they have in the country called Springbok, and they really rallied the whole country around that. So there's a whole good story about that in Invictus if you want to take a look at it. So we have Claire W. Graves, we have Beck and Cowan, and then we have another person that kind of independently came on some of the same kinds of materials. A guy named Ken Wilber. He's a contemporary philosopher, mystic, and author. And independently of Graves and spiral dynamics, he studied about 100 major models for human and consciousness development. And he saw a pattern in all of these different models that corresponded to each other remarkably well, and began to define these particular levels of consciousness that's remarkably close to spiral dynamics. And then actually later on, Don Beck and Ken Wilber teamed up a little bit in some joint efforts. Okay, that's enough of background. Let's start getting into the actual spiral dynamics itself. So again, we've said there's 7 levels that we're going to look at. There are actually proposals that there are more than 7 levels that have actually begun to unfold in human experience. Certainly an 8th level, and maybe even a 9th level, but the fact is there's so very few people on the planet that are in those levels that it actually, for our purposes, would just be so speculative. And I don't know, given where I'm at with my own development, I could actually adequately explain them or even understand them. So we're going to go through 7 levels, and to show you how this unfolds, the 7th level, which is called yellow, is only less than 1% of people in the country, adults in the country, or in the world, I'm sorry, have developed into yellow. So it's, even that's a pretty small percentage of people. So here are the 7 levels we're going to look at. The first one is called beige, and these colors that are assigned to all these levels, and that really just provides not significant meaning in any of the colors. There's a little bit, but it really is just a handy way to know what we're talking about. You could just as easily say level 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. But I like to use the colors. I found it extremely helpful in conversation and understanding of what we're doing. So the first level is called beige. This we see in the early human experience, and this is bare survival level. That's it, just to get through every day with basic needs. Second level is level purple. In purple, we actually get to a magical and tribal level of experience. The third level is called red, which we're going to call a powerful self-expression level. Following that is level 4, which we're calling blue. Blue is the absolutistic law and order stage of development. That is followed by the orange level, level 5. This is the enterprising individual stage of development. Next after that is level green, which is the 6th stage of human development, which is the egalitarian inclusive stage. And then the 7th one we're going to look at is the one that is given the color yellow. We're calling it the integrated self. So we will have, again, entire videos on this, but I'm going to give you a little bit of a shorter overview just to kind of get a baseline that we can build on for these future videos. And so that when I'm talking in these individual videos on the various levels, if I'm talking about green or I'm talking about orange, you'll know somewhat what I'm talking about, even if we haven't gotten to those particular levels yet. So beige is the first one. Again, this is basic survival. It's a me stage. What happens in spiral dynamics is each stage alternates between a me stage and a we or group sort of a stage. And so this first one is me, and it is reflexive. It is instinctual. It's rooted in responding to life from instincts rather than a thought process. So it's pre-rational in this particular way. And therefore it's a reactionary kind of mental process. It's responding to whatever's going on in the environment. Now, again, we've talked about this spiral dynamics applies to both individual development and societal or cultural development. So at the individual level, beige actually responds best to the infant stage of human development, where it is a me stage for sure, and it is a survival stage. Now, when we're infants, we know that though we may have a kind of a peaceable kind of resolve within us, we actually see the whole world as us in early infancy. We don't have any differentiation yet between us and anyone or anything else. So it kind of all is our world, and all is us. And so what we see as the goal of spirituality is to have that kind of a unity with all things, but a conscious unity instead of the unconscious unity that we see in infancy. So what we'll see in spiral dynamics from this stage on is an ever widening circle that of belonging and of identification, personal identification. So at this stage, it's still, again, very focused on ourselves. And so it's a limited stage, but that's just really fine. That's fine. That's what stage we go through, and it's a lovely stage for all of us who get to interact with infants. But the focus of this stage in human development is survival needs, like food and warmth and sleep and a clean and dry diaper. So the strategy is very simple for an infant at this stage. When everything's fine, we're contented. When anything goes lacking, well, we got to cry, okay? Now, at the cultural level, this survival thing is actually, we don't actually see any particular groups, human groups in the world today. They're actually in beige. Maybe 100 years ago, you'd still see a few little groups that might be, but it's long past in terms of cultural expressions of that. So in this beige stage, as it had existed, it's again very instinctual and is a reliance on genetic heritage that's going to allow us to be alert and concerned about alert in order to have ourselves safe. But because it's pre-rational, it's a primitive stage of development. Though one might in beige travel with other people in a small band, it really wasn't about the other people. That could come and go according to the needs. The main focus was my survival, and it was going to be, challenging at a lot of particular points. So we don't see people groups anymore at this stage, but there are expressions of it in cultural life. For instance, there may be some regression that we have, let's say in really severe Alzheimer's disease, for instance. Somebody may regress to where their concern really is just with basic survival and really very little else other than that. We may see that in among some of the homeless persons that maybe have regressed through mental illness, and survival on the street really is their focus. So that's beige. Let's go on to the next level, purple. Now, the first one was about survival. This one becomes about safety. If you remember Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we move from survival needs to safety needs. Well, so to here in purple. So we know that there's safety in numbers, right? And so there is a concerted effort to actually be in a group. We've gone from a me focused group to a we focused group. So we have these tribes and clans, which are really largely extended family groups in most cases. But instead of it just being merely instinctual at this particular point, it's the beginning of a little cognitive development here. So that rather than looking at life simply sweeping over us and coming as it may and simply reactionarily responding to it from an instinctual point of view, there's a little bit more of exploration about what's going on here. There's the beginning of asking the question, why do things happen? And is there any way that we might intervene so that things don't simply sweep over us, but we have some influence on the things that come our way in life? So there's the putting together of ideas about why things happen, kind of cause and effect thinking at a very elementary level is beginning to come online. And then asking, how might we intervene to try to control these events of life? So what was concluded in level purple is that there are, the cause and effect is this, that there are spirits and powers in some form that are behind the things in nature that we're interacting with, whether it's trees or animals or wind or rain, really anything, that there is behind them these various spiritual influences. And because there's some power behind that or spirit behind that, perhaps we can appease them, be on their good side by some sort of sacrifices or appeals or some other action such as that. And so in this, there is a movement into the world of magic, of superstition, and the supernatural. Now, not as a sidelight that we might just have some interest in, not just some dabbling around, but actually as the fundamental reality of the world, and the fundamental way of interacting in the world. In human development, in purple, we have a magical stage that we have in early childhood. We move out of infancy and start differentiating. We start to ask the questions why, and often children this age ask why about everything. So we see that that there's this magical thinking of trying to figure out the world best we can with the resources and abilities that we have. And so children will assign reasons to things happening that aren't necessarily rooted in reason itself. So things like step on a crack, break your mother's back, or Santa Claus, or the Tooth Fairy, or monsters under the bed, or witches or ghosts, all those things that children might imagine are all part of that magical phase of trying to figure out the world with its joys and its dangers, and trying to figure it out with this magical thinking. This is a stage in purple in human development where family bonding is really, really important, where parents are authoritative and maybe even godlike in a way. They have that much authority, but children are part of that family. That's their root and their essence and their grounding. So in the cultural purple, where you've got the chief and the clan leader that have total authority over the direction of the group, and they have total authority of the adherence of the individuals in the group. So it's very much a chief and elders dominated. They call all the shots. And there'll also often be a shaman figure in there who's important in interpreting the signs and making intervention for the clan. Okay, let's move on to the third level, which is red. This is this powerful self that we've talked about. Here, how does this happen? Well, when you're under the domination of chiefs and elders and shamans, here you are, this mighty, powerful warrior. You're the most successful warrior out there when you're hunting game or whatever it may be, or going against enemies that may come against you. And you begin to put together, I'm actually stronger than the chief is. I've got greater abilities than he is, and yet he's dominating all these things. And in fact, I'm finding this very oppressive, in fact. And in fact, I'm not even so sure about the shaman, all his interpretations about things. It sometimes seems a little manipulative to me. Maybe there are different interpretations. So what happens in stage red is there's a rising of independence that begins to happen in individuals. Now we've gone from the me stage in beige, the we stage in purple, back to a me stage in red. And so we're beginning to discover the power of me. I've got power. I can influence these things. I can lead. I can take authority. I can wrest control from other people that are insisting on their dominance. I am powerful. I am assertive, and I can assert myself into these situations of life and in leadership in order to become a leader and to impress my will instead of the will of other people. In this stage red, there still is a likelihood to have belief in the clan gods and the spiritual forces, but they're no longer restricted to the interpretation of the clan leaders. In this stage red, the moniker is to take what you want when you want it, no remorse. If I want this thing, I'm going to go get it. I will use aggression, I will use violence or any other means necessary to get what I want. And I'll have no remorse about that because I deserve this. So it is a very aggressive and violent stage. In modern American culture, we do actually have red in a lot of ways. For instance, we'll talk at greater length about examples when we get into the individual studies of these. But for instance, in gangs are very much red. The mafia is very red. Antifa, which is in the news currently, is extremely red. Looting mentality of taking what I want when I want it is very much a red perspective and worldview. In human development, personal human development, stage red is famously manifest in the teen years with varying degrees of intensity, but it's when that comes out where we're discovering who we are and the power that we actually have. And so parental authority and other authorities are questioned, sometimes even rejected and opposed. And there we see the direct assertion of the self. Now let's move on to stage blue, which is the fourth stage. Well, obviously red can cause a bunch of chaos. And what happens in the blue level is blue begins to respond to the problems produced at red with the rise of order, particularly law and order. In this stage blue, we see the rise of civilizations, of nations, of sophisticated cultures, of kings and kingdoms, of bureaucracies, of cultural systems. And blue is also the level where the major religions develop and thrive. The major religions of the world develop and thrive at level blue, like the Ten Commandments, for instance. But also we see other things in this culture that are very blue that develop, like law and courts, crime and punishment, infrastructure of military and police forces. So to swing back from a me focus to a we focus, but this time a much larger group. It's not just a little clan or those extended family group. Now it's a much larger group, and it might be my nation or my religion or my race. And the overriding theme of blue is truth, absolute truth. That there is an absolute truth, and this absolute truth can be known, and we should embrace it. So it's not the kind of thinking you would see later on that you have your truth and I have my truth, but rather there is one truth, and that's our truth right here. One that we embrace is the correct one. All others are, to varying degrees, incorrect. We are fortunate enough to have the right position, the right truth, and it's absolute. And so now, in blue, those truths can be very, very different, where you have a blue structure, but the content's very, very different. For instance, Western democracy can be very, very blue, and often is very, very blue. At the same time, classic communism is also very blue as well. Now, their ideas are extremely different, but the structure of how they see the world, their worldview, and how they respond with their absolutes are identical, essentially. And so in human development, in the personal human development, we see stage blue developing as people move into early adulthood in particular. In other words, they begin to grow up out of that red sort of teen independent sort of mentality of finding their own way. They start taking on various responsibilities, adult responsibilities, like jobs and careers and marriages and families and children, all sorts of other commitments. And as we develop in this, and individually, we will have an adherence to and an allegiance to a truth or a cause that is greater than ourselves, like love of country or devotion to God. So blue is a move from the chaos of red to becoming a good citizen. That moves us into orange. Stage orange, this is a swing back to another me stage. This is where rationality really comes to bear. It's introduced significantly at this stage. Now, interestingly enough, orange only burst onto the scene, the major world scene, in the Enlightenment. So this is a really relatively new stage of human development. There would be a few individuals along the way that might have moved into orange, but very, very few. But as a worldview, one that's embraced by a larger group, it was the Enlightenment. So we're talking about just a few hundred years ago that this has began to become prominent. So in the Enlightenment, we see brought to the world stage a new openness to options and possibilities. As a season of beginning to experience free thought, outside the box thinking, the rise of science and the scientific method, of accelerated invention, of innovation and technology. It was and is today a time of increasing industrialization, entrepreneurship, finance, commerce, materialism. It's a stage of life of acquisition, culturally and individually. Acquiring things as symbols of success, of being a successful human being. And so having lots of things, lots of the best things, are symbols of being successful at stage orange. So the worldview and the values within this are really quite different than other stages. So you want these symbols of success, of nice things to own. Consumerism is really important, things such as that. Competition and winning is in high profile in stage orange. It's me-centered, but unlike the red me-centered thing that we see, orange goes through sort of insisting on one's will and purposes. They do so without aggression, direct aggression, and certainly violence, without setting people off. Orange is trying to acquire these particular things and maybe even manipulate in particular ways, but in an extremely different way than red does. And so there's a refining of how that individualism works out. And so orange is more mannered and more nuanced than red will be. Now you may begin to detect from that description that not everybody in the whole world is going to be rising through all these levels. And some, they really haven't, that's really not much available to them. And anybody can stop at any particular level that they choose to and simply live out their life at a particular level. And that's okay, as long as it's in a healthy version. You might observe here from what I'm describing about orange that there's a lot of orange in American society. All right, let's go on to green. We have two more. Green, now, the thing about stages and why one might move into another stage is if we begin to hit a ceiling in a particular stage and we have a set of problems that we really can't seem to answer at that particular stage, there may be an unfolding to a new stage of consciousness development. And this is kind of what happens at stage green. But some of the problems of orange, the things that are developed there, can lead to a move into the green level. Something like being discontented. So suppose you're in green and you put your whole life into the acquisition of these things, of success and the winning and having it all, and you've achieved that success. You've got a boatload of money and all the things that anybody could ever want, and yet you're not feeling satisfied. You say, surely there must be more than this. And so there's this discontent that might move us beyond what orange offers. Another problem that manifested orange, that's more of a cultural problem, is that in orange, we're doing all this building and making and expanding and industry and ever more production, which means ever more use of the world's resources. And it seems to be sort of apparent that not everything that we utilize for things has an endless supply. There comes a time when those resources, as limited as they are, will run out. And so green is looking at this problem and begins to expand the scope that we need to actually be responsible for the whole world. And so green expands its scope. And the way it expands its scope with people is a greater concern for others than any other level has had. Orange is actually the first level that is world-centric. In fact, in orange, we get many of the human rights movements come out in orange, but it's kind of limited in a sense. That there's still places and values and levels within all of that, or it may be that we're interested in the whole world because, well, we can sell to China just as much as we can to Australia. It's all green money, right? So there are a lot of reasons one would be world-centric. But with green, it becomes a real a core value that everybody in the whole world has value and ought to be dealt with equally. Equanimity is absolutely essential at the green level, that everyone is included and equally included, no matter what their race, their gender, their sexual orientation, their nation, their education, their disability, etc. All are exactly equal. And no one should be left behind. There's also in green, and the way that community works, again, we're back to a we stage, that community works through consensus. So in order for decisions to be made, we all must come into agreement because everybody's equal and everybody's voice is equally valid. So we have to all kind of agree together in order for us to move forward. Now, you're probably beginning to see some of what we're talking about in our own culture here. The problem that, against every level solves some problems but presents new problems. And Green begins to present problems in terms of their the application of solving problems that they've identified. Because of their structure, especially consensus, it makes decision-making really, really difficult. And it's hard when everything is equally valid to make sound, definitive, positive actions for people in Green. They want the world to change, and yet they're not very effective at facilitating those changes. So that leads us to the final level we're going to look at, which is level yellow. So this is really kind of a momentous change when we get to yellow. Again, only about 1% at best of human adults are at this particular stage. So it's something that's new and developing. But in the first 6 stages, so beige through green, is what's in spiral dynamics is called tier 1. Then yellow is the very first one of what's called tier 2. And what's different between tier 1 and tier 2? The main thing is that in yellow, in the first of tier 2, is the first level that actually sees the whole spiral, all the different levels that people are moving through. It sees them and appreciates that they're all important, because what they say in spiral dynamics is nobody gets to skip a stage. In order, if you're going to develop, you have to develop stage by stage by stage. You have to go through every single one of those. And so they're all important. They're all important for human existence. In stages 1 through 6, beige through green, the unfortunate thing is they only see the validity of their own level. And so there is, they dislike other levels, they dismiss other levels, even demonize levels other than themselves. And so many of the cultural and political upsets that we see are between these stages that just don't get along. Like in the Western world, we see that in the West, conservatives tend to be in stages blue and early orange, whereas liberals and progressives are in late orange, but particularly green. And we've all seen the warfare that goes on between these particular groups. It's because they dislike, dismiss, and demonize each other, as we've said. But yellow sees the value in each of these groups. And so what yellow is about, it's very focused on information and knowledge, of gaining all this information that will help yellow develop systems to make each level as healthy as possible and to keep the spiral open in order for people to move forward. Now, if you imagine a culture that's all stuck in red, you know, what it needs to do is get to blue with law and order and dealing with the chaos. But, you know, if you want to try to jump them to green, it's never going to work. It's not going to work at all. We'll talk more about that in later sessions. But yellow sees the necessity of all these movements through there. And because of this deep understanding, now yellow is very open-minded, as say green is too, but it also has a high degree of discernment. It realizes that everyone's of value, but not everyone is equal in terms of abilities or knowledge, all these different things. Everybody's got their valuable place within that. So it allows for a more realistic movement and development of human life and existence together. Yellow also has the ability to speak to each particular level. It understands each one, it's been through those levels, and is able to speak with respect and helpfulness to every single level. Therefore, like if you're speaking to somebody in yellow and whatever level you're at, and you think, wow, this person's right here. They understand me perfectly. Well, they do, but they're not necessarily at the same level as you, but they appreciate and encourage you at whatever level that you are. So that's, again, a brief look at the 7 levels we're going to be looking at. I hope it's been helpful to begin to see the lay of the land a bit. And again, we're going to go much more deeply in this. Next video will be Kimberly LaPointe. Well, she'll be laying a little bit more groundwork in terms of the introduction to understand some concepts that are important to know in terms of moving through the levels of the spiral. And then following that, we will actually start diving into the individual levels, starting with beige, and take the deep dive into that. And I think it's going to be helpful to you. And again, I think the examples that we give are going to really bring these things home to you. I think you're going to enjoy it. And if you just hang with us, I think you're going to get a lot of benefit. So I want to end every session with this clear focus about why we're doing what we're doing here from the Apostle Paul. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your minds. God bless.